Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into the moment Tieu tried to earn money in the market, just so his exhausted mom could finally rest. But one stranger's offer nearly changed everything. What happened next when gossip reached their doorstep? Stay with me to find out. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next video. The next morning should have felt lighter after the park trip. Lytieunu had smiled. Tieu had laughed until his cheeks hurt. Trong had held her hand all the way home like he didn't care who watched. But peace in their village never lasted long. It always came with a price. Lytieunu woke up before the sun, like her body didn't know how to rest anymore. She moved quietly through the kitchen, trying not to wake Tieu. The house was still dim, the air still cool, and for a moment she thought she could steal a few calm minutes for herself. Then a cough hit her dry at first. Then deeper. She covered her mouth fast, but the sound still echoed off the walls. Trong was up instantly. He came out with messy hair, eyes half open but alert like a soldier. "Lytieunu," he said, voice low. "Sit." "I'm fine," she whispered automatically. He just walked over, took the kettle off the stove, and poured warm water into a cup like he'd been doing it his whole life. Lytieunu held the cup with both hands. The warmth soothed her throat, but her guilt rose immediately. "You don't have to." "I do." "Because you won't." Lytieunu looked down at the cup. "I'm not trying to be difficult." "I know," Trong said. "You're trying to be strong." That sentence hit her harder than the cough. She blinked fast, but the moisture still gathered in her eyes. From the bedroom, Tieu's sleepy voice floated out. "Mom? Dad? Why are you whispering?" Lytieunu wiped her face quickly. Trong answered first. "Go back to sleep, buddy." But Tieu was already padding into the kitchen in his oversized shirt, hair sticking up, eyes squinting like he was still half dreaming. He stopped when he saw Lytieunu coughing again. His face changed immediately. The playfulness disappeared. "Mum, are you sick?" "No," Lytieunu said too fast. "Just a little tired." Tieu looked at Trong like he didn't believe her. Trong crouched so he was at Tieu's level. "Mum needs rest," Trong said. "That's all." Tieu's eyebrows scrunched together as if he was trying to solve a problem too big for his age. "But if Mum rests," he said slowly, "who will help?" Lytieunu's heart squeezed. Before she could answer, Trong said calmly, "I will." Tieu blinked. "You already work?" Trong nodded. "Yes." Tieu looked down at his small hands, thinking hard. Then he said something that made Lytieunu's throat tighten. "Then I should help too." Lytieunu shook her head immediately. "No, Tieu, you're a kid. You don't need to." But Tieu didn't hear no. He heard problem. And once Tieu decided something was a problem, he became stubborn in the cutest and most dangerous way. He marched to the table, climbed onto the chair, and sat like he was calling a family meeting. "Mom," he announced, "today you sleep." Lytieunu tried not to smile. "Tieu?" "No," Tieu insisted, waving his little hand the way Trong sometimes did. "Dad said you need rest." "So you rest." Trong's mouth twitched, like he was holding back laughter. Tieu turned to Trong with a serious expression. "And Dad, if you do everything, you'll be tired too." "That's true." Tieu sat up straighter, as if that confirmed his mission. "So, I will make money." The kitchen went quiet. Lytieunu stared. Trong stared. Trong asked, not sure he heard right. Tieu repeated it with full confidence. "I will make money, then Mum can rest. Dad can rest too." Lytieunu's chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. "Tieu," she said softly, "money is not your job." But Tieu wasn't listening to the logic. He was listening to love. He looked at Lytieunu with wide eyes and said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. I just want you to smile like yesterday. That was it. That was the moment. Tieunu's eyes filled. She looked away quickly, but the tears still escaped. Trong's jaw tightened, and he took a slow breath like he was trying to stay calm. Trong walked over, lifted Dai off the chair, and sat down with him on his lap. "Buddy," Trong said quietly, "you don't have to make money." Du frowned. "But how will Mom rest?" Trong paused. Because what Du said wasn't wrong. In their world, rest always felt expensive. Trong chose his words carefully. "I'll handle the money," Trong said. "Your job is to be a kid. Your job is to learn, to play, to stay safe." Dewey didn't look convinced. "But I can help." "You can help," Trong admitted, "but not like that." Du tilted his head. "Then how?" Trong glanced at Tieu, her tired face, her watery eyes, her hands wrapped around the cup like it was holding her together. His voice softened. "You help by making Mom laugh," he said. "By eating well, by listening, by not worrying." Du stared up at him, still serious. "I can do that," he said. Trong smiled. "Good." Tieu wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to cry." Truong looked at her. "You can cry." That made her cry more. Trong stood up, carrying Du with one arm, and with the other, he reached for the scarf he'd used yesterday. He gently placed it around Tieunu's shoulders, exactly the same way as before. "Sit," he said again. Tieu tried to protest, but Trong gave her the look, the calm, steady look that meant he was not negotiating today. She sat. Trong turned to Du. "Come with me. We're going to the market." Dewey's eyes widened. "Can I come?" "Yes," Trung said. "But you stay beside me." Du nodded enthusiastically. Then he looked back at Tieu with sudden worry. "Mom," he said, voice tiny now, "don't stand up when we leave." Tieu laughed through tears. "Okay." Truong and Du walked out, and Tieu sat alone for a moment in the quiet house. Listening to their footsteps fade, she felt the familiar guilt rise again, like she should be doing something, like she was being selfish. But Truong's words echoed in her head. "Not today. You're allowed to be happy." She closed her eyes and tried to rest. Meanwhile, at the market, Du clung to Truong's sleeve like a little shadow. The market smelled like wet vegetables and dust and morning heat. Vendors shouted prices. Coins clinked. Plastic bags snapped open and tied shut. Truong moved with practiced speed, greeting people, weighing produce, handing change. Dewey watched everything with huge eyes. At first, he was impressed. Then he was horrified, because Truong's work wasn't magic like Du thought. It was heavy. It was constant. It was adults arguing over 1,000 dong like it was the end of the world. A customer frowned at Truong. "Too expensive." Truong stayed calm. "It's fresh. That's the price." Du's little face tightened as he watched. Another customer argued longer, forcing Truong to discount. Du whispered to Truong, "Why are they mad?" Truong leaned down. "They're not mad. They're just trying to survive." "Yes, like us." He looked around the market like he was searching for a solution only a child could imagine, and suddenly his gaze locked onto something. A small side path near the stalls where kids sometimes stood with baskets or carried bags for shoppers. Du pointed. "Dad," he said, voice low, like he didn't want Truong to stop him. "I can help carry." Truong frowned. "Carry what?" Du nodded toward an old boy holding 2 heavy bags for an elderly woman. "That boy is helping." They gave him money. "But, no," Truong repeated, firmer now. Truong knelt beside him in the busy market, ignoring the noise around them. "You helping isn't the problem. You risking yourself is." Du's lips trembled. I'm not a baby. Truong's gaze softened. I know. That's why you need to be smart. Du wiped his face quickly like he was ashamed to cry. Truong took a breath. Here's how you help, Truong said. You stay close. You help me remember what Mom needs. Okay? Du sniffed. Count? Truong nodded. He opened his palm and showed Du the coins. See this? This is 5,000. This is 10,000. You can be my assistant. Du's eyes lit up, just a little. Assistant? Truong smiled. Yes. Du nodded quickly. I can do that. And for the next hour, Du took his job seriously, handing Truong bags, counting coins with his small fingers, reminding Truong, Dad, don't forget warm tea for Mum. Truong felt proud and worried at the same time, because Du's determination wasn't fading. It was growing, and Truong knew children like Du didn't quit. They just found another way. Then, when Truong turned to grab produce from a crate behind him, only for a second he heard a voice nearby. A stranger's voice. Hey kid, the voice said. Want to earn some money? Just carry this bag over there. Truong's head snapped up, and his blood went cold, because Dee had turned, and Du was already reaching for the bag. Dewey, Truong's voice cut through the market noise so sharply that even the nearby vendors turned their heads. Du froze, his small hand hovering inches from the heavy bag the stranger had offered. The man, mid-aged, impatient eyes, a smile that didn't feel warm, kept the strap raised as if nothing was wrong. I'll pay him. Just carry it over there. Truong stepped forward in one long stride and pulled Du behind his leg, not yanking him, but placing his body between Du and the bag like a wall. No, Truong said. The man's smile stiffened. Why not? Kids do this all the time here. Truong didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was colder than shouting. Not my kid, he replied. A few people nearby stared openly now. The man's face flashed with annoyance, like he hated being embarrassed. It's just one bag, he muttered. Overprotective. Truong held his gaze. Walk away. For a second, the man looked like he might argue again. Then he scoffed, grabbed the bag back, and disappeared into the crowd. He crouched down in front of Du, hands gently holding Du's shoulders so Du couldn't look away. Buddy, Truong said low, steady. You never take a job from a stranger. Never. Du's eyes were wide, full of guilt and stubbornness at the same time. But he said money. Truong nodded once. I know, and that's exactly why you stop. Du's mouth trembled. I just wanted Mom to rest. Hearing that, Truong's chest tightened. He could see it clearly now. Du wasn't being reckless because he was naughty. He was being reckless because he loved them and didn't know how to handle fear. I believe you, he said, and I'm proud you want to help. But listen, Truong continued, helping your family doesn't mean you put yourself in danger. Du whispered. Then what do I do? Truong paused. The market kept moving around them, shouts, bargaining, bags snapping open, but Truong held this moment like it was fragile. You do what you already did, Truong said. You stay close. You help me safely. You love Mum. Du sniffed. That's not enough. Truong's jaw tightened not at Du, but at the world that had taught a child rest was something you had to earn. It is enough, Truong said firmly. Mum doesn't need your money. She needs your heart. She needs you safe. After a beat, Du nodded. Good, Truong said. Then here's your mission. We're going to bring Mum something small, something that tells her she can rest. Truong glanced around the market. He didn't have extra money for gifts, not the kind people imagine. But he could afford thoughtfulness. He guided Du to a fruit stall, Trung chose a few bananas, ripe and soft, the kind Tieu could eat even when she wasn't feeling strong. He added a couple of oranges for vitamin C, bargaining only a little, politely, the way regulars did. Tieu watched carefully, then pointed at a small pack of honey sticks hanging near the counter. "Mum likes honey and warm water," Tieu whispered, like he'd discovered treasure. Trung looked at the honey, then at Tieu's face. That serious little face. "That love. Okay," Trung said. "1 pack." Tieu's shoulders relaxed like he'd finally contributed something real. Truong paid, then handed the small bag to Tieu. "Carry this," Truong said. "Stay close. Don't let go." Tieu held it with both hands like it was the most important thing in the world. They returned to Truong's stall to finish the last of the sales. Truong kept Tieu tucked right beside him, counting coins, handing bags, watching, learning. Whenever someone stepped too close, Truong's hand would instinctively rest on Tieu's shoulder, guiding him back. After an hour, the market crowd thinned a little. Truong packed up. Tieu stayed quiet, but his eyes kept drifting toward other kids doing small jobs. On the walk home, Tieu finally spoke. "Dad, if Mum rests, do we have less money?" Truong didn't lie, maybe a little. Tieu's face fell. "But," Truong added quickly, "if Mom gets sick, we lose more than money." Tieu's voice went small. "We lose Mom." Truong swallowed. "Yes." Tieu clutched the fruit bag tighter. "Then Mum must rest." Truong nodded. "Exactly." When they reached home, the house was quiet, too quiet. Truong's instincts sharpened. "Tieu?" he called gently as he stepped inside. No answer. He moved quickly to the kitchen, heart tight, and found her sitting at the table, head lowered slightly. The warm cup was still in her hands. She looked like she'd tried to rest, but her body didn't trust rest. Tieu looked up, startled. "You're back early." Truong walked closer. "Are you okay?" Tieu nodded too fast. "Yes, I slept." Truong didn't argue. He just read her face the way he always did, pale cheeks, tired eyes, the faint strain around her mouth. Before Truong could say more, Tieu rushed forward like a little storm. "Mum," he said, bright and urgent. "We brought you something." Tieu blinked. "Something?" Tieu placed the fruit bag on the table carefully, almost ceremoniously. "Bananas," he announced. "Oranges. And honey." Tieu stared at the bag as if she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Then her eyes turned wet. "Why?" she whispered. Tieu climbed onto the chair beside her and grabbed her sleeve gently. "Because you need rest," he said, voice small but firm. "And because I want you to smile like yesterday." That sentence broke her. Tieu's lips trembled. Tears slid down her cheeks. She pulled Tieu into a tight hug, holding him like she was afraid to let go. Tieu hugged her back hard, burying his face into her shoulder. Truong stood there, feeling warmth and ache mixed together. "You didn't have to spend money." Truong set the honey pack beside her cup. "I spent money so you'll stop spending yourself." Tieu's eyes widened like the words landed in her bones. Truong poured more warm water, opened a honey stick, and stirred it in slowly. "Drink," he said. "Then eat a banana. Then rest again." Tieu tried to protest out of habit. "But the chores." "I'll do them," Truong said. "You'll be tired," she whispered. Truong nodded. "I already am." The honesty stunned her. Then he softened. "But I'd rather be tired," Truong said, "than watch you fall apart." Tieu covered her mouth, crying harder. Tieu peeked up, worried. "Mum, are you sad?" "No, buddy," Mum is relieved. Tieu nodded like he understood, Then his face tightened again with guilt. Dad, did I do bad at the market? Tieunu's head snapped up. What happened? Truong exhaled slowly. He didn't want to scare her, but he wouldn't lie. Someone tried to get Tieu to carry a bag for money, Truong said. Tieu went pale instantly. Her hands gripped the table. I stopped it, Truong said quickly. Nothing happened. Tieu let out a shaky breath and pulled Tieu closer, hugging him too tight. Tieu, she cried, don't do that again. Tieu's eyes filled. I only wanted you to rest. Tieunu's voice broke. I want to rest too, but not like that. Never like that. Truong stepped in, firm but gentle, placing a hand on Tieu's shoulder. Tieu, Truong said, you are not responsible for our money. Do you understand? Tieu sniffed. But Mom is tired. That's why your job is to love her, not fix everything. Tieu's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry. Truong's voice softened. I'm not angry. I'm grateful, but you have to stay safe. Tieu wiped her face and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I heard you and Dad talking. Tieunu's eyes flicked to Truong, guilt flooding her face. Truong squeezed her hand. This is why we change things. Tieu swallowed. How? Truong looked at her steadily. We make new rules, he said. Mom rests. Dad works smarter. And Tieu stays a kid. Tieu looked up. Work smarter? Truong nodded. We'll sell more through the shipper. We'll pack at night. We'll stop fighting over every little discount. And we'll stop acting like rest is a crime. People will talk. Truong's gaze hardened in that calm, protective way. Let them, he said. They don't live in this house. We do. Tieu stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like she was finally allowing herself to believe she could put the burden down. Tieu yawned suddenly, all the emotion finally catching up with him. Go nap, Tieu whispered, stroking his hair. Tieu hesitated. Will you both be okay? Truong nodded. We'll be okay. Tieu padded off, and the house fell quiet again. Truong turned to Tieu. Drink your honey water. She obeyed, sipping slowly, eyes still wet. After a moment, she whispered, I chose this, and I'll keep choosing it. Tieu finally leaned forward, resting her forehead near his hand. No arguing, no guilt, just surrender. And that's when a shadow crossed the doorway. A familiar woman's voice called sweetly from outside, the kind of sweet that carried poison. Truong, she said, peeking in. I heard your son was trying to work today. And Truong stepped forward, calm, protective, ready because he could handle exhaustion. But he would not let anyone twist Tieu's love into a weapon against their family.